Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Hello, and welcome to AI and the Future of Work, the weekly podcast where we discuss the future of work with entrepreneurs, executives, venture capitalists, and journalists. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of Insight Finder, the AI-first system of intelligence for IT operations, and executive chairman of PeopleRain, the leading platform for automating IT and HR employee service. We're in this insane time where there's a global pandemic raging, wildfires of biblical proportion, and, oh, by the way, centuries-old civil rights issues being literally adjudicated in the streets. It's hard to not step back and ask the big question. Is society in the middle of being broken, or is it in the middle of being healed? Are we on a path to treating each other and the environment better? Will the current strife yield societies with fewer dictators, human rights for all, less polarization, and more equitable distribution of wealth? I don't know about you, but I want a world where my kids don't ask me why the sky is red, or why an elderly man had his head cracked open by riot police on the streets of Buffalo. We all want that. We all want a peaceful and just society. We don't all agree on how to get there. Today, we have a special guest who is on the front lines of Silicon Valley's efforts to be part of the solution. Cassie is a senior leader with a social conscience and a large platform, being on the executive team at Intuit, one of the most respected tech companies on the planet. Cassie is the senior vice president of QuickBooks Online, where she and her team work closely with entrepreneurs and small businesses. She has unique insights into the future of work for the self-employed. And that's a group that represents about a third of the US workforce. Now, if you roll back the clock a few weeks back, we heard from Deborah Hannes, Sparrow's CEO, who talked about the inherent bias in company leave policies. Well, today we're going to get a different perspective, but the theme is similar. Women's rights are human rights. Equal pay for equal work should not be controversial. Now, I'll step off my soapbox because I want to introduce you to Cassie. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Cassie's not only my friend, she's my high school classmate, and she's a leader I highly respect. Cassie, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Dan. It's awesome to be here. And let me first say to your open, I was at an event last night and someone said, let this breakdown lead to a breakthrough. And I thought that was a great way to think about how we emerge from the ashes, literally, and build a better world. So my career background is a fun one. I like to say that I have hacked my own career. If we went based on conventional wisdom of how a career progression and path is supposed to go and what you're supposed to do when and at different points in your career, probably by that conventional wisdom, I've done everything wrong. Yet it's been a great ride. So I started my career in high-tech public relations at an agency in San Francisco at the end of the 90s. Several years later, that led me to Intuit. I was drawn to the vision and the mission of the company. I like your moniker that one of the world's most respected companies. We definitely feel like we're a best kept secret in the Valley. And I joined to work alongside the CEO at the time, Brad Smith, and the founder of the company, Scott Cook, in a communications capacity. And then 15 years in, I changed careers and did a number of those things you're not supposed to do. I took a demotion. I moved from leading a sizable team to contribute as an individual. And I started working to help build and scale our self-employed business at the time. And you fast forward today, you shared my title. You know, the real point of it is I have the honor of leading our QuickBooks product organizations that are so humbled to serve our customers, our small business customers, and our self-employed customers, as well as our accountant experts and our third-party developers. And as varied as some of my experience has been, one constant has been a focus on impact, and technology is the great equalizer. So I'm thrilled to be here. You
mentioned the world-class leadership culture at Intuit. tell us what you've learned from being around transcendent leaders. You mentioned Brad Smith, former CEO of Intuit, but also Scott Cook and now Sasan Goodarzi. What have you learned from them?
Well, let me start with Brad. I have learned so much from Brad that when he transitioned to Sasan as CEO, I published an article on LinkedIn called Legendary Leadership, The Wisdom of Brad Smith, and it literally has pages of things that I learned from him. But let me share one that I draw on almost daily, which is the courage to be your authentic self. Brad would share a lesson that he learned from his father when he was the mayor of their hometown in West Virginia. And the lesson of the story was that people prefer their leaders with flaws because it makes leadership more attainable for the rest of us. And that is how Brad led. He led so authentically, so vulnerably, with such humility. Sometimes it would almost take your breath away. And it was just such a amazing example of something that inspired you to lead more as your authentic self. On Scott Cook, first I'll just say getting to work in Scott company, I should say getting to serve in Scott's company and to advance a mission that he set out. We were founded now almost 40 years ago. It is such an honor. And like so many others, I benefit from his wisdom constantly. I could probably write a book. Let me leave you with, probably one of the biggest things I come back to all the time is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Scott is such a bold leader when it comes to thinking about customer problems. And he likes to say, if you want a big business, you solve a big problem. And we benefit from his coaching constantly. Sasan, our CEO, I have also learned so much from him. Probably most front and center for me right now, we just had our leadership conference at the company, is this idea that if it is important to you as the CEO of a company, as the leader, as any leader, you focus on it, you declare it, you set bold goals for it, you measure it. And that has been as true for Sasan in how he leads of rolling out big bets that we tackle as a company, in the way he has championed diversity and inclusion. It is now on the metric scoreboard the whole company uses. It has been factored into our operating values. There is no question to nearly 10,000 employees where we need to focus, how we'll know if we're making progress in the short and long term. And that is a really powerful way to lead and get alignment so that you really unleash a company to achieve its potential.
I love that word that you described, the adjective to describe Brad, authentic. I think you also said genuine. I was lucky enough to spend an afternoon with him and just came away feeling like such a connection to him. Like I was hanging on his every word. The only leader I've met, this is kind of a silly name drop, but not intended to be so, but is John Chambers. Reminds me a lot of Brad. Same kind of West Virginia humility. Obviously, two transcendent leaders. So we got a lot of entrepreneurs listening to the podcast who are trying to define their own company cultures. How would you describe the value system or the set of core values at Intuit?
First, I would say 13 years now I've been at Intuit. One of the words that comes to mind when I think about my own experience has been caring. And I think now more than ever, I appreciate being at a company that views me as a human first. And I've seen that throughout my whole career, and how we support each other when someone's battling an illness or caregiving and needs support. We care about our customers in ways beyond, I think, what you would hope that any product company cares about customers, but there's just a level of understanding and empathy that is really powerful. And that unites us. And I think it's complemented by a spirit of curiosity about what else we can do and how we can do more. And it's complemented by a way that we push each other to raise the bar, because that's what we owe to our customers. And it's a really special place to be a part of. On our values specifically, we have a set of operating values that, like I said recently, we've refreshed them. We've only refreshed them a few times in our history, and it's never been a massive change. It's more of just adapting to how our aspirations are changing and what's most important to us. Like I said, the concept of diversity inclusion has become more of an explicit thing that we care about. Our 5 values are integrity without compromise, courage, customer obsession, stronger together, and we care and give back.
One of those values you mentioned is customer obsession. Curious to get your perspective on what does it mean to be customer obsessed in the middle of a pandemic? Has it changed how you live that value?
Let me first define what we think about when we think about customer obsession. It is applying Scott's advice I mentioned. We fall in love with the problem. It is focusing on delivering a customer benefit. Are we looking to help save or make money for a customer? Are we trying to save them time? Are we trying to deliver increased confidence? And then it's sweating every detail of the experience. And like everything right now, we've got to adapt. And I'll call out 2 ways. One is understanding customer problems. Customer visits are now Zooms. Customer prototyping sessions in person are now done online. We are supplementing online forums and listening posts on the outside. What are people talking about in forums about our products? What are they talking about in forums broader of how they're navigating the pandemic? Similarly, we're listening at scale with the information we have from customers. Charlene Lee, I remember when she was on your podcast, mentioned this idea to listen at scale, that technology can now let us connect all of these dots that might have been anecdotes before and bring them together as a broader picture. And I absolutely agree and have seen the power of natural language processing to identify and classify topics and themes from the customer call transcripts that come in, from the sales calls that our teams do. And so that helps us do exactly what she mentioned, listen at scale, so that we can stay on top of what's most important to our customers. The other area is we've built new offerings so that we can meet our customers' needs at this critical time. In the US, for example, we've built a couple things that leverage our platform capabilities. We've partnered with the government, and one of them is a free website called Intuit Aid Assist. It lets consumers and small business owners, self-employed workers, figure out what they're eligible for in terms of financial relief that's come under the CARES Act. And what's neat about it is it uses our AI. It uses the same knowledge engineering technology that TurboTax uses to simplify the tax code, but it goes through hundreds of pages of the CARES Act, and it converts it into an easy to understand interview that just asks you what we need to know from you and get the right answers to questions to figure out what you're eligible for. On the small business side, we had a QuickBooks Capital offering and became in this pandemic a non-bank SBA approved lender so that we could be there for our customers with the Paycheck Protection Program. And using our technology, we could simplify, automate, and expedite that application process. And what I'm most proud of is the businesses that we were able to serve are the businesses that would have been left behind, the businesses that are most likely to not be able to get a bank loan. And so we were able to serve as small as self-employed customers, as well as our employers, but many of them with less than 10 employees, with less than 5 employees. And as of August 1st, we had connected those small business customers with more than $1.2 billion of approved loans. And then, of course, with our software, we'll help it get forgiven. And so it's just such a great example of bringing customer obsession into what's most relevant right now.
So in this show, we talk about the future of work. And you mentioned, the online forums and the opportunities you've had to listen to entrepreneurs. What would you say has changed about your perspective on the future of work over the last 6 to 9 months?
I think that for me, a lot of things are things in terms of, what we were seeing or what we were thinking about doing. They're the same core concepts, but we have much different urgency to approach them. And I think in some places, when you look at what's going to happen in terms of unemployment, we are going to see a lot more self-employment. People are not going to have a lot more choices. We are seeing a lot of small businesses who had a fairly brick and mortar business shift to online. That was already happening. We were already seeing a lot of retailers, for example, look to expand across channels. And that has just accelerated overnight. And so there is a lot of shift happening within some of the segments, services going more virtual and such. But in terms of the focus that we have had, which is how do we use the power of our technology and our experts and our AI-driven platform to tip the odds in small business favor, that is durable. But I think the urgency that all of us come to work with is we have to move faster, because every day that businesses or consumers have just less income and less of a savings amount to rely on, they risk going out of business. And just the anxiety level, you can hear it in the phone calls you have, you can read it in the online forums. And so I would say a lot of these shifts have been happening, but particularly into self-employment and the rise of individual entrepreneurship, as well as a move to virtual services and online services, we're going to see that accelerate.
How has the pandemic changed your philosophy or even your operational cadence as a leader? How do you keep remote teams engaged and motivated when you're not there face to face?
It's a good question, and I'm going to be interested to hear what you're doing as well, because Dan, anybody who asks me that, I ask them the same right back. I have been, there are two things I would say. One is I think I've been more focused for my own leadership on what I would almost say is back to basics. There are a number of things that when you're in the office, they just come naturally. You walk around and see people and check in on them. You give people feedback after you walk out of a conference room together or after, something happens. And so there are a number of things where I have had to think differently about communication and putting a higher price on it. Also thinking about communicating a lot more. I found myself writing a lot more things down because we're all trying to have less meetings. I found meeting hygiene matters more than ever. And maybe we were getting a little sloppy and meeting sometimes when we didn't need to when we were in the office. I found that check-ins with people when they don't walk by, I have a list of people I want to check in on. And so I say back to basics of, doing things that I have found that they are a little harder to accomplish organically or naturally in a remote environment. From motivating a team perspective, we've been iterating pretty much this entire time. I think like many companies, when the pandemic first started, we were shell-shocked a little in terms of you didn't know how many things you needed to reinvent and how long we would be doing this. We've also, we quickly got into a rhythm, but that rhythm has changed when our kids then it was summer and then now they're back in school. And so, we've been really trying to have as many listening posts as possible, being sensitive to people needing to take care of themselves and their families first and foremost, and giving a lot of autonomy to teams and keeping the dialogue open so that we can change. I think we've found that what works one week might not work a few weeks later. And I think that there are areas like mental health that are really hard to understand how everybody's doing, and finding a way to check in on. But that's one of the things on our mind constantly. So we've probably, from a leadership perspective, have said we need to communicate 3x what it would have been. And I've encouraged all of my leaders and teams, take care of yourself first and foremost, but really being intentional about thinking about how to apply what could have been just second nature when we're in the office and lead in this environment. What have you found?
Yeah, I like your answer. First of all, like you said, it's a continuous learning process because the pandemic is not one monolithic thing. It's changing every day, and it's changing who we are every day, and it's changing our culture and the culture at work every day. So I think as leaders, it's incumbent on us to change with it. 3 things that I've found myself doing differently that have stuck during the pandemic. One, I'm trying to be intentional about starting every one-on-one with a genuine, heartfelt question that is, how are you? And said with emphasis, because one of my mantras is, my only role as a leader is to hire the whole person and create a safe place where they can do the best work of their lives. At the end of the day, that's the only way that I care to be measured. But so one thing is just genuinely making time in every one-on-one just to listen to how the whole person is doing. I think the second thing that I've adopted as kind of a new mantra is we're humans first. And so I welcome pets and babies and spouses and background noise and because we're humans, and to try to pretend otherwise, or try to segment personal from professional at this point is it's artificial, and I think it constrains the team from being the best versions of themselves. And then the third thing is kind of tactical, but I found works, is to try to replicate those kind of ad hoc hallway conversations. I've set aside office hours where I'm just on Zoom, and I can be working or not, but I won't schedule other calls. And it creates a nice kind of a fishbowl effect where people do wander by, and we have conversations that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's not the happy hour virtual beer conversation, but it's just it's an open door policy. So it's certainly no formula, but I like your answers, and it's kind of what's worked for me.
I love yours too. I'm going to apply them next week.
Likewise. So you recently published a wonderful blog post with yours and presumably some of Intuit's perspective on the pay gap and equal pay, and I assume it was timed somewhat to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. My question to you, and having read the post and really, being inspired by it as father of 2 daughters, are we making progress?
We are making progress, but first I'll say 100 years later, the promise of the 19th Amendment hasn't been fully realized. And for all American women, especially women of color and underrepresented, underserved women. So that post did coincide with that centennial and some work we were doing with a great organization called the 19th to raise awareness of this and their mission to empower women, particularly those underserved, with the information and the community and the tools. So an action-oriented, let's go fix this thing organization that we've partnered with. We are making progress. On one hand, women have made great strides over the last decade. When you look at the narrowing of the pay gap, we've made great strides when you look at the creation and the share of women-owned businesses. At the same time, those women-owned businesses face unique challenges, such as access to capital. When we look at the pay gap, we've tackled a lot of the the big things, and we're getting into some of the harder and less visible drivers that we have to tackle. Pew researchers look at, one piece is much of the pay gap that we've made progress on. It has big measurable factors such as education, occupational segregation, women's work experience. And so the narrowing of the gap we've made has been attributed to those dimensions, but there are other factors that are difficult to measure that even the Pew researchers, it's hard to get underneath. And there are things like gender discrimination. How prevalently does that contribute to the ongoing wage discrepancy? And so there are a number of things that as a society we will need to continue to tackle across government and private industry. The post I shared did represent Intuit's view. Intuit's view is there is no prosperity without equality. And we believe there is a significant role for businesses to play. 3 years ago, we officially took a stand. One thing I will encourage your listeners to think about is we found ourselves caring about this, but we hadn't officially declared that we would hold ourselves accountable to reaching pay equity, to sustaining pay equity for employees. And so just making that commitment is so powerful. And we believe that that is something all companies need to do so we can achieve that equality across society. And, what I would counsel everyone to consider is it's not achieved as a moment in time. It takes ongoing work, it takes accountability, it takes transparency, continuous analysis. And so there is work to get underneath, but we do want all companies to join us in this fight of let's get to pay equity, let's support female entrepreneurship, and we'll make a ton of progress. I think for a while it's going to be unfinished work that can't stop.
How do you encourage women and underrepresented minority entrepreneurs to persevere when they hit that wall because they feel like there's some structural bias in the system that's preventing them from succeeding?
I have come to understand that what I personally need to do here isn't talking, it's listening. It isn't what I could say to show that I can relate or why I think this can get better, even though that is true. That's where I would typically start to go to. Encouragement comes when we show through our actions that we're committed to understanding and to make a difference. And I think many women and underrepresented minority entrepreneurs would trade 100 pep talks for someone to sit down and listen to what gets in their way and how does it feel and what are they up against and hear ideas of what we can do. And so for someone like me, I've shifted far more from what am I going to say to how do I use my power and my privilege and my position to make a difference. And similarly, Intuit is thinking about that. How do we use our platform to commit to change, to share with other companies what we're doing and what's working so others can benefit and lift people up versus being any part of what you mentioned, which is there's a lot of systems that are keeping people down. But I think it really comes to encouragement through showing a commitment and willingness to act.
I'll tell you what I told Charlene, which is I see you as a role model for my daughters, and at some point I want them to spend some time with you. Maybe we'll get Rose together as well. I'd love for them to hear that. It's a powerful message.
Yeah, I love that, Dan. And I would say, you and I are talking about our daughters because we have daughters, but if you had sons, we should spend time too. I mean, this is, as you said at the very beginning, this isn't a female issue. This isn't a minority issue. This is an issue we should consider as such a opportunity to tackle to make our society and our businesses and our world better. And so I look forward to that. I look forward to the day we can get back together again without masks. So I'm looking forward to it.
That too. Now, Cassie, we're bad out of time, but I've got to get in this one last question before I can let you go. So we're going to open up the time capsule and we're going to roll back the clock about 25 years to when you and I were standing on top of the Grossmont High School gym for some reason, thinking that it made sense to pretend it was a medieval castle the day before homecoming. Now, let's channel that earlier version of Cassie. What's the advice that you have to the Cassie that was I think, gosh, if I remember right, like publicity director or something, standing on the roof of the old gym? What would you tell that version of Cassie?
That is a good question, Dan, and I can actually remember that well. I don't know if I would give myself much advice about career or path, because when I consider everything I've done, I have benefited from the journey, and so I don't know, sometimes I feel like when people answer this question, it's about sort of fast forwarding or shortcutting some of the hard stuff or the the meandering that you did, but I think a lot of that was really beneficial and shaped a lot of who I am. Aside from considering whether or not I should graduate in 4 years or not from college, maybe I would tell my younger self to get some extra travel. A lot of the advice I would give my younger self, not that that younger self would have understood it at the time, would have had to do with making better decisions about taking the vacation I had, about traveling more before I had anything to tie me down. It would have been about really thinking differently about keeping, my friends and family, which have always been a priority to me, but I could have always done more. Were there trips to meet somebody for their 30th birthday that you didn't take because of a, work? Sure. And so I think I would have given myself some advice on living my life a little bit more fully, just in case something might happen one day. And maybe exercising more and taking up a good habit like running. What advice would you have given 18-year-old Dan?
Oh gosh, I don't think we have the full 6 hours to go through. But the short version is, and I love your advice to yourself, by the way, but the short version is placed and maybe even continue to place. I'm still broken, but I placed far too much value on things that could be quantified, kind of traditional things that indicate progress or achievement, whether it's grades or dollars or things that ultimately are arbitrary. And I place too little value on creating value in things that aren't traditionally quantified or hard to measure, like compassion and how much do I help other people, and can I make someone's day a little better? And it turns out the me now has had to learn the hard way that I feel much more fulfilled. The things that I thought would provide guidance, validation, etc., don't so much. And the things that really end up helping me assess my my personal achievements or my personal growth are the things that are somewhat intangible, but certainly being a parent and trying to be a role model, I've realized that cliche as it sounds, it's some of those intangible things that really 18, 16-year-old, whatever it was, version of myself just had the value system kind of backwards.
Absolutely. One of my favorite Clay Christensen books isn't one of his innovation books. He wrote a book, I don't know if you've read, called How Will You Measure Your Life?
Of course. May he rest in peace.
It is, I feel like the entire spirit of that book, he'd be proud of us. And absolutely what many people answered in that research.
Well, Cassie, it feels like we're just getting started. Maybe we'll pick up where we left off and have you back for another for a part 2. How's that sound to you?
It sounds great, Dan. I'd love it.
Good. Well, this has been fantastic. Cassie, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. Hope you enjoyed it as well. We'll be back this week with another fascinating guest on AI and the future of work.